Imagine a man who, by day, dons a colorful clown costume, twisting balloons into animal shapes for kids, making them laugh with his bright smile and endless enthusiasm. He's a successful businessman, a respected member of the community, a devoted husband, and a loving father. But when night falls, this man turns into a monster, luring young men to his suburban home, taking their lives and hiding their bodies beneath the floorboards. This isn't the plot of a horror movie. It's the chilling reality of John Wayne Gacy, one of America's most notorious serial killers. Known as the Killer Clown, his painted smile was just a mask for the heart of a predator. How does a person become such a monster? What drove him to commit these horrific crimes? And how did he evade justice for so long? Before we dive in, let's honor the victims by sharing their story so their losses are never forgotten. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, to a working-class family with Polish and Danish roots. His father, John Stanley Gacy, was a World War I veteran and mechanic, while his mother, Marion Elaine Robinson, was a homemaker. The second of three children, Gacy grew up in Chicago's Norwood Park, a quiet neighborhood. On the surface, the Gacy family seemed normal, but beneath that facade was a tense and traumatic home where the seeds of Gacy's psychological struggles were planted. John Stanley Gacy was a controlling father, an alcoholic who often abused his family. He saw Gacy as a disappointment, constantly mocking him with insults like stupid or weak whenever he showed any traits that didn't fit his father's idea of manly. Gacy's love for gardening and cooking, hobbies his father deemed girly, became targets for beatings and humiliation. Meanwhile, Marion was a kind but passive mother, trying to shield her son from her husband's rage but rarely succeeding. Her love was Gacy's only comfort growing up, but it couldn't erase the emotional scars his father left behind. As a child, Gacy faced serious health issues. At 7, he was diagnosed with a blood clotting disorder and often fainted due to a blood clot in his brain. Long hospital stays left him feeling isolated, and instead of sympathy, his father accused him of faking his illness to avoid responsibilities. This distrust deepened the rift between them. Gacy grew up craving his father's approval, but no matter how hard he tried, whether through good grades or community activities, his efforts were dismissed. Gacy's teenage years weren't much easier. He was an average student, not excelling in academics or sports, and was often bullied for his chubby build and shy personality. But Gacy soon discovered the power of charm. He learned to win people over with his wit and friendliness, a skill he'd later use to manipulate and deceive his victims. In high school, he started joining community activities like charity events and local gatherings to craft an image of a model young man. Yet behind this perfect exterior, Gacy was grappling with deep inner conflicts, including suppressed feelings about his sexuality, which he knew his family would never accept. In 1960, at 18, Gacy left Chicago for a fresh start in Las Vegas, Nevada. He worked at a mortuary, where he came face-to-face with death daily, an experience some psychologists later said may have worsened his mental state. The job involved preparing bodies for funerals, and according to some reports, Gacy admitted to being drawn to the stillness and control of the corpses. Though he only worked there for a few months, the experience left a lasting mark, planting the seeds for the twisted ideas he'd act on years later. Back in Chicago, Gacy aimed for a more stable life. He enrolled in a local college to study business and worked as a shoe salesman. With his smooth talking and hard work, he quickly impressed coworkers and bosses. In 1964, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, to work for a fast food chain, where he was promoted to manager. It was here that Gacy began building his image as a successful, trustworthy man. A perfect cover for the dark secrets growing in his mind. That same year, Gacy met Marlon Myers, a coworker at the restaurant chain. Marlon was a beautiful, smart young woman from a well-off family. Her father, Fred Myers, owned a chain of fast food restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa, and was impressed by Gacy's drive and ambition. After just a few months of dating, Gacy and Marlon married in 1964, a turning point in his life. The marriage not only gave Gacy a wife, but also a chance to move to Waterloo, where Fred Myers put him in charge of several restaurants. In Waterloo, Gacy quickly fit into the community. He became active in the JCs, a group for young leaders, and was even named Man of the Year for his contributions. He also started dressing as a clown, performing as Pogo the Clown at charity events and children's hospitals. This image, a fun, generous man who loved kids, earned him the community's trust, but it also became the perfect tool to hide his true nature. However, Gacy's marriage to Marlon was far from perfect, despite appearances. In 1966, they welcomed their first child, Michael, followed a year later by their second, Christine. While Gacy played the role of a devoted father on the surface, he started spending more time away from his family, especially at local clubs and bars. Rumors about his inappropriate behavior began to spread, particularly about how he often approached young men working at his restaurants. In 1968, the darkness within Gacy started to surface. He was accused of sexually assaulting a teenager named Donald Voorhees, the son of a fellow Jaycees member. According to Donald, Gacy invited him to his house, got him drunk, and forced him into sexual acts. When Donald told his father, the incident was quickly reported to the police. Gacy was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison for sexual assault, but he served only 18 months due to good behavior. This case marked the first time Gacy faced legal consequences, but it also revealed his terrifying ability to manipulate. He tried to intimidate Donald into retracting his statement, and even hired someone to beat him up to silence him. The case destroyed Gacy's marriage to Marlon. In 1969, she filed for divorce, gained custody of their children, and cut off all contact with him. Gacy lost his family, his job, and his reputation in Waterloo. But instead of reforming, he became even more reckless. Released from prison in 1970, he returned to Chicago determined to rebuild his life and began a series of crimes far more horrific than anything before. To grasp the brutality of John Wayne Gacy, we must look at his victims, young men and teenagers whose lives were cut short by his deceit and violence. Most of Gacy's victims were young men, aged 14 to 21, often from vulnerable groups like runaways, prostitutes, or those looking for work. Gacy targeted those least likely to be reported missing, exploiting society's indifference to cover his tracks. Here's the story of one of his first victims to show how Gacy lured and destroyed his prey. Gacy's first known murder happened on January 3, 1972. According to Gacy's later account, after a family party the previous night, he drove to the Civic Center in Chicago's Loop early that morning to see an ice sculpture display. Afterward, he lured 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy from Chicago's Greyhound bus station into his car. McCoy was on his way to his father's house in Omaha, Nebraska, and told Gacy his bus wouldn't arrive until noon. Gacy offered to show McCoy around Chicago and invited him to spend the night at his house, promising to get him back to the station in time for his bus. Before McCoy was identified, he was known as the Greyhound busboy. Gacy claimed he woke up the next morning to find McCoy standing in his bedroom doorway, holding a kitchen knife. He jumped out of bed and McCoy raised both hands in a gesture of surrender, accidentally cutting Gacy's forearm. Gacy disarmed McCoy, slammed his head against the bedroom wall, and kicked him into a closet. McCoy kicked Gacy in the stomach, doubling him over. Gacy then grabbed McCoy, wrestled him to the floor, and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest. As McCoy lay dying, Gacy said he washed the knife in the bathroom, then went to the kitchen and saw breakfast set out on the table. McCoy had prepared it for two. He'd gone to Gacy's room to wake him, unknowingly holding the knife. Gacy buried McCoy in his crawl space and later covered the grave with concrete. In an interview years after his arrest, Gacy said that right after killing McCoy, he felt completely drained, but noted that as he stabbed McCoy and heard his gurgling and gasping, he experienced a mind-numbing orgasm. He added, "That's when I realized death was the ultimate thrill." After killing Timothy McCoy in 1972, John Wayne Gacy realized he could keep murdering without getting caught, thanks to society's apathy toward vulnerable victims like runaways, drifters, or those working illegally. He perfected his method, turning his house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park into a deadly trap. Through his PDM contractor's construction business and his Pogo the Clown persona, Gacy easily approached young men, luring them with promises of jobs, money, or a place to stay. But behind his generous facade, Gacy was a cold-blooded predator, always looking for a chance to satisfy his twisted desires. The second murder. Gacy claimed his second murder took place around January 1974. The victim remains unidentified. He was strangled and stuffed into Gacy's closet before being buried. Gacy later said that bodily fluids leaked from the victim's mouth and nose, staining his carpet. To prevent this with future victims, Gacy often stuffed rags, the victim's own underwear, or a sock into their mouths. On July 31, 1975, John Butkovich, an 18-year-old PDM employee, vanished. His car was later found abandoned, with his jacket, wallet, and keys still inside. The day before he disappeared, Butkovich had confronted Gacy about unpaid wages. Butkovich's father called Gacy, who said he'd be happy to help find his son, but claimed Butkovich had run away. When questioned by police, Gacy said Butkovich and two friends had come to his house to demand the overdue wages, but they reached an agreement and all three left. For the next 3 years, Butkovich's parents called the police over 100 times, urging them to investigate Gacy further. Gacy later admitted to seeing Butkovich step out of his car and waving to get his attention. According to Gacy, Butkovich approached him, saying, "I need to talk to you." Gacy invited him into his car, then back to his house, supposedly to settle the wage dispute. At his home, Gacy offered Butkovich a drink, then tricked him into being handcuffed behind his back. Gacy confessed to sitting on the kid's chest for a while before strangling him. He hid Butkovich's body in his garage, planning to bury it later in the crawlspace. When his wife and stepdaughter returned home earlier than expected, Gacy buried Butkovich under the concrete floor of a toolroom extension in the garage, in a spot where he'd planned to dig a drain tile. Between 1972 and 1976, Gacy killed at least 15 people, all young men or teenagers aged 14 to 21. He'd often invite them to his house with offers of drinks, marijuana, or job discussions. Once inside, Gacy would get them drunk or drug them, then bind them with rope or handcuffs. He used a technique called the fake handcuff trick, convincing victims it was a harmless game, only to lock them up and carry out his violent acts. After sexually assaulting and killing his victims, usually by strangling them with a rope or his hands, Gacy hid their bodies in the crawl space under his house, digging shallow graves, sprinkling lime, and pouring concrete to mask the stench. When the crawl space became too crowded, he considered storing bodies in the attic but worried about leaking fluids, so he began dumping them in the nearby Des Plaines River instead. While building his empire of crime, Gacy maintained an astonishing double life. He was an active member of the local Democratic Party, even posing for a photo with First Lady Rosalynn Carter at a community event in 1978. He hosted huge barbecues at his home, inviting hundreds of neighbors and friends, while his victims' bodies lay beneath their feet. As Pogo the Clown, Gacy performed at children's hospitals and charity events, winning the affection of kids and parents alike. No one suspected this cheerful man was a cold-blooded killer, and the community's blind trust allowed Gacy to keep killing for years. Gacy's second marriage to Carol Hoff also began to crumble during this time. Carol, initially drawn to Gacy's stability and generosity, started noticing his odd behavior. He frequently brought young men to the house at night, claiming they were PDM employees or friends needing a place to stay. Carol also noticed a foul smell in the house, which Gacy blamed on the sewer system or dampness in the crawl space. In 1975, after finding gay pornography in Gacy's bedroom, Carol confronted him. Gacy bluntly admitted he was attracted to men and no longer interested in her. Their marriage ended in 1976 when Carol and her 2 daughters moved out. With Carol gone, Gacy was left completely unchecked in his house of horrors, free to continue his killing spree. Though Gacy operated without suspicion for years, small mistakes and carelessness began to draw attention. In 1977, a young man named Jeffrey Rignall became the first known survivor of Gacy's attacks, marking a turning point in his story. Jeffrey Rignall, a 26-year-old, met Gacy in March 1977 at a Chicago bar. Gacy offered to smoke marijuana with him and invited him to his house. Unsuspecting, Jeffrey agreed. But as soon as he stepped inside, Gacy used a chloroform-soaked rag to knock him out. For hours, Jeffrey was bound, with his hands and head tied to a stake device on the ceiling and his legs locked in another contraption. Gacy raped and tortured him with tools like burning candles and a leather whip, repeatedly drugging him until he passed out. Afterward, Gacy dumped Rignall, unconscious but alive, in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Rignall managed to stumble to safety and immediately reported the attack to the police. giving a detailed description of Gacy and his house. But the Chicago police at the time didn't take the case seriously, partly because Rignall was gay, and the assault was brushed off as a personal dispute. Determined to seek justice, Rignall hired a private attorney and investigated Gacy himself. He even tailed Gacy and pinpointed his address, but the police still didn't act right away. Rignall's case was a missed chance to stop Gacy, and in the following year, Gacy killed at least 10 more people. Meanwhile, Gacy's neighbors started complaining about a strong, foul smell coming from his house. Gacy always blamed the sewer system or dampness, but some grew suspicious. A PDM employee, Michael Rossi, who briefly lived at Gacy's house, also noticed the strange odor and odd activities but didn't report anything, likely out of fear of losing his job. Gacy continued to maintain his perfect facade, hosting big parties and staying active in the community, ensuring no one dared question him. The end of Gacy's reign of terror came in December 1978 with the disappearance of Robert Piest, a 15-year-old from Des Plaines, near Norwood Park. Robert was a lively high school student who worked part-time at a local pharmacy to save for a car. Described as smart, friendly, and full of potential, he told his mother, Elizabeth Piest, on December 11, 1978, that he was meeting a contractor to discuss a high-paying summer job. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy. Gacy had visited the pharmacy where Robert worked to discuss a remodeling project. Overhearing Robert's desire to earn extra money, Gacy quickly offered him a chance to talk details at his house. Trusting Gacy's professional demeanor, Robert agreed to go with him after his shift. That was the last time Robert Piest was seen alive. Unlike many of Gacy's previous victims, Robert came from a close-knit family, and his disappearance immediately raised alarms. Elizabeth Piest, worried when her son didn't return home, contacted the Des Plaines police within hours. Pharmacy employees confirmed Robert left with Gacy, making him the prime suspect. This time, the police took the case seriously, spurred by the Piest family's urgency and local public pressure. Robert Piest's disappearance on December 11, 1978, marked a turning point in Gacy's crime spree. Unlike many prior victims, Robert came from a tight-knit middle-class family, and his absence triggered immediate concern. Elizabeth Piest didn't hesitate when Robert failed to come home after his pharmacy shift. Within hours, she called the Des Plaines Police Department, reporting that her son had left with a contractor named John Wayne Gacy. Elizabeth's quick action and the family's persistence forced the police to act swiftly, something rare in Gacy's earlier cases. Led by Lieutenant Joseph Kozenchak, the Des Plaines police zeroed in on Gacy as the main suspect. Kozenchak soon uncovered Gacy's 1968 Iowa conviction for sexually assaulting Donald Voorhees. Though Gacy had been released and had no charges since, his past raised red flags. On December 12th, police visited Gacy's home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue to question him. Gacy greeted them warmly, confidently claiming he knew nothing about Robert's disappearance. He said he'd only met Robert at the pharmacy to discuss a construction project and hadn't seen him since. Gacy even invited the police inside, but they declined, lacking a search warrant. Kozenchak, however, wasn't convinced by Gacy's charm. He found it odd that Gacy seemed overly relaxed, even inviting police into his home without hesitation. This made Kozenchak suspect Gacy was hiding something. He applied for a search warrant and put Gacy under constant surveillance. Meanwhile, police interviewed pharmacy workers who confirmed Robert left with Gacy around 9 p.m. on December 11th. Another witness, Robert's co-worker Kim Byers, recalled Robert mentioning a meeting with a contractor about a well-paying job. These details tightened the link between Gacy and the disappearance. On December 13th, police returned to Gacy's house with a preliminary search warrant. This time, they noticed a strong, foul smell, which Gacy blamed on the sewer system. During the search, they found suspicious items: a high school ring engraved with Maine West High School, Robert's school, gay pornography, and a coil of rope similar to those used in murders. However, there was no clear sign of Robert in the house, and the warrant didn't allow digging in the crawl space. Gacy remained cooperative, but Kozenchak sensed growing tension in his voice. Over the next few days, police kept Gacy under surveillance, noting he often left his house at night, driving to secluded areas near the Des Plaines River. This behavior convinced Kozenchak that Gacy was trying to dispose of evidence. Meanwhile, the Piest family relentlessly pressured the police, organizing community searches and appearing on TV to plead for information about Robert. The public attention began to rattle Gacy, and he started making mistakes. On December 21, 1978, the Des Plaines police secured a full search warrant for Gacy's house, backed by mounting evidence and public pressure. This time, they brought forensic experts and equipment to inspect the crawlspace. Upon entering, investigators were overwhelmed by a stench too strong to be explained away. Michael Albrecht, an investigator, noticed the shed floor showed signs of recent digging and ordered the forensic team to start probing. As they began digging, they found soft soil beneath the floor, and within minutes, they uncovered human bones. A horrifying scene unfolded. Gacy's crawlspace was a hidden graveyard, holding the bodies of dozens of victims, many severely decomposed. The bodies were buried in shallow graves, covered with lime to mask the smell, but the sheer number of victims had overcrowded the space. Within 24 hours, police recovered at least 10 bodies, and the count kept rising as the excavation continued. Meanwhile, Gacy was arrested on December 21, 1978, on charges related to Robert Piest's disappearance. Faced with undeniable evidence, Gacy began to crumble. He confessed to killing Robert, claiming the teen had come to his house to discuss a job, but an accident occurred when Gacy tried to restrain him. Gacy insisted he didn't mean to kill Robert, but this story quickly fell apart as police uncovered more bodies. Under intense questioning, Gacy gradually revealed the true scale of his crimes. He had killed at least 33 people between 1972 and 1978, burying 29 under his house and dumping 4 in the Des Plaines River. Police and investigators were stunned by the magnitude of the case. Chief Prosecutor Terry Sullivan described Gacy's house as an underground slaughterhouse. The bodies were found in varying states. Some were mere skeletons, while others, buried more recently, still had soft tissue. Identifying the victims was a massive challenge, as many were runaways or unreported missing persons. Forensic experts relied on dental records, fingerprints, and family descriptions to identify each victim. Among the bodies, police identified John Butkovich, Daryl Sampson, Randall Reffitt, and others. However, Robert Piest's body was not under the house. Gacy admitted to dumping Robert's body in the Des Plaines River just days before his arrest, prompting a police search along the river. In April 1979, Robert's body was found, bringing painful closure to the Piest family. Gacy's arrest and the discovery of his house sent shockwaves across America. The media dubbed him the Killer Clown, a nickname tied to his Pogo the Clown persona, which he used to gain trust. Images of Gacy in his clown costume with a painted smile became a chilling symbol of horror, making the public shudder at the thought that such a monster could hide among them. The Norwood Park community, where Gacy lived and operated, was left in shock and disbelief. Neighbors who attended Gacy's barbecues couldn't fathom that they had eaten and laughed atop buried bodies. Lillian Grexa, a close neighbor, recalled smelling a foul odor in Gacy's house but never suspected anything serious. "He was a kind man, always helping people," she told reporters, her voice heavy with pain. The realization that Gacy had deceived an entire community left many feeling betrayed. The victims' families experienced a mix of grief, anger at the police's earlier indifference, and some relief that justice was finally being served. Elizabeth Piest, Robert's mother, became a voice for the families, advocating for reforms in how police handle missing persons cases, especially for young people. "If they had investigated sooner, my son might still be alive," she said in a tearful interview. Meanwhile, Gacy became a focal point of fascination and horror. Psychologists and criminologists analyzed his behavior, trying to understand what turned a seemingly normal man into a serial killer. Some argued that Gacy's abusive childhood, combined with internal conflicts over his sexuality, created a disordered personality. Others contended that Gacy was a calculating psychopath who knew exactly what he was doing and relished the power he held over his victims. John Wayne Gacy's trial began on February 6, 1980, at the Cook County Courthouse in Chicago. It was one of the most high-profile trials in U.S. history, drawing hundreds of reporters and spectators from across the country. Gacy faced 33 counts of first-degree murder, along with charges of sexual assault and battery. prosecutor Terry Sullivan led the prosecution team, determined to ensure Gacy would never walk free. Gacy was represented by attorneys Robert Mata and Sam Amarante, who pursued an insanity defense. They argued that Gacy suffered from multiple personality disorder, claiming he couldn't control his actions during the murders. To support this, the defense called psychologists like Dr. Richard Rappaport, who testified that Gacy experienced periods of unconsciousness during his crimes. However, the prosecution fiercely countered this claim. Sullivan highlighted Gacy's meticulous planning, from luring victims to disposing of bodies, proving he was fully aware and in control. Throughout the trial, Gacy remained calm, occasionally smiling or taking notes, which unnerved many in the courtroom. He refused to take full responsibility, often blaming the victims or claiming they brought it on themselves. His testimony about Robert Piest was particularly infuriating. He claimed Robert had agreed to a game and that his death was an accident. The Piest family, present in court, struggled to contain their emotions as they heard these lies. Surviving witnesses, including Jeffrey Rignall, played a crucial role in exposing Gacy's brutality. Jeffrey recounted the harrowing details of his attack, describing how Gacy used chloroform and tortured him for hours. His testimony not only clarified Gacy's methods, but also made the jury realize he could have killed even more people if not caught. After 6 weeks of trial, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. On March 13, 1980, John Wayne Gacy was sentenced to death for 33 counts of murder. Upon hearing the verdict, Gacy showed no emotion, while the victims' families embraced, crying in relief. Elizabeth Piest told reporters, "Nothing can bring my son back, but at least he won't hurt anyone else." Today's case comes to a close. The truth still lingers somewhere in the shadows. Thank you for following along with this case. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling case. See you in the next mysterious fog.